Hi everyone! So today is actually part 2 of our levels of organization in the human body. So the whole point of the mini video lecture that we're having right now is so that we can prep for next class. And next class we are going to be doing a lab. And this lab is based on the different levels of organization in the human body. So it's very good to know the different levels before we do the lab. So without further ado, let's get on with it. Alright, so this is pretty much a review of what we talked about last class. We know that there's different levels of hierarchy, and we see in this image we have 7 key levels. So last class we talked in depth about the first 3 levels, and we were at starting level number 4. So what we're going to do is we are quickly going to review the first basic levels, so level 1, 2, and 3, and then we're going to talk more in depth about levels 4 to 7, because our lab that we're going to be doing next class is really going to be focusing on level 4, level 5, and level 6, because level 7, as we'll see, is the organism in total. So again, level 1, atoms. So basically matter is made up of atoms, and there's 3 components. We have our electrons, we have protons, and we have neutrons. So our electrons is the black component that we have. So this over here. Our protons and our neutrons are in our nucleus. So our protons are our white circular spheres, and our neutrons are our gray circular spheres. Again, when we have 2 or more atoms that are bound together chemically, we get a molecule. And when you have multiple molecules come together, they form cells. Now, I said this last class, and I want to stress this again this class. The moment you start forming cells, this is when we get into living organisms. Anything that has mass, so living things and non-living things, they have both atoms and molecules. It's only when you start going onto the living side of organisms that you have cells and all the other hierarchies. So cells, right, they are the basic unit of life. And we can basically subdivide life into 2 things. Our first component can be unicellular, so that means you only have 1 cell, or life, anything living, can be multicellular. And multicellular means that they are made up of multiple cells. So an example of a multicellular organism is us. We have billions upon billions upon billions of cells in our body at any given time. Now, because we're part of the animal kingdom, in all of the organisms that we're looking at, they'll have animal cells. Now, in secondary 2, you talked about different organelles that make up the animal cell. We are not going to be spending a lot of time on that, but I just want to highlight some key components. So here we see a schematic diagram of an animal cell, and key things that we need to note. Nucleus, it's where we have our DNA. Mitochondria, so that's where the cell produces energy. The cytoplasm, so that basically keeps the cell and everything inside the cell in its proper shape. And our cellular membrane, so that's basically the barrier that surrounds the cell, and it controls what enters and what leaves. So the 4 organelles that I highlighted, those are the things that we need to keep in mind throughout the rest of the term. Again, there are many different types of cells in a living organism, and not all cells are the same. Cells do different jobs. So because they do different jobs, you can put them into different categories based on their job. And what we do is we call these specialized cells. When you have specialized cells come together, that's where they form tissue. Now this is where we ended up last class. So we have 4 categories of tissue. And what we're going to do right now is we're going to take time to go through each of these categories. So our first type of cell is the epithelial tissue. Now this has an extremely important job. This type of tissue covers and protects organs. Now it does this for both outside of the body and inside of the body. Now, they don't just cover and protect the organs, but they do also lots of secondary functions. So, secrete fluids. So when we say secrete, we mean release. They can also absorb fluids, and they can filter fluids. So epithelial tissue is extremely important. Now, common example, and this is probably the most common, is the skin. The skin is epithelial tissue because its entire job is to do what you think? Cover and protect organs. So pretty much your skin is protecting all of the organs inside your body. And then you also find epithelial tissue surrounding all of your interior organs. So the top layer of cells on your stomach is epithelial tissue, and your heart, and so on and so forth. So key thing that we need to remember, and this is extremely important, is that they are the protectors by covering all of your organs. So that's our first type of tissue. Now we're going to move on to our second type of tissue. Now these guys, they're our nerve tissue, and they're also extremely important. They are our messengers. So they send and receive messages from both outside and inside the body. So a good thing to think of your nerve tissue, they're basically like telecommunication system. Because they're sending and receiving all of these messages. And the prime example of nerve tissue is your brain. Your brain is a huge processing center. And all your brain does is getting messages from all different parts of your body, inside and outside, making sense of these messages, and then relaying more messages. So nerve tissue, extremely important. You find it pretty much everywhere in your body, inside and outside. So now we're going to move on to our next type of tissue. Our next type of tissue is called connective tissue. So the job of connective tissue, okay, key word is connect. So what they do is they bind and support the tissues and organs in the body. So they are basically, if you want to think of what our connective tissues are, they're basically infrastructure. There are infrastructure in our body, and they are the most abundant and widely distributed tissue in the body. So what it basically means is you find connective tissue everywhere because their entire job is to bind and support all the tissues and organs in the body, and by doing this they give you protection, they supply nutrients, and they give structure. So the most common example of connective tissue are your bones. Without any bones, you would have no structure in your body whatsoever, and you wouldn't have any protection. For example, your rib cage protects all of your internal organs. If you didn't have a rib cage, one accidental bump and, oh look, you've just burst your spleen. So connective tissue, extremely important, but you have major variety in your connective tissue, which we're going to see when we spend a lot of time looking at different systems. So now we're going to move on to our last type of tissue, which is, you guessed it, muscle tissue. So muscle tissue, their job is to contract and relax, allowing the body to move. So if we were using analogies, well, the muscle tissue, they are like the, I guess, for lack of better ideas, our cars or our transport system. They allow us to move. Now, you can divide muscle tissue into three main groups. Our first group is skeletal. So those are all the muscles that are attached to the skeleton. So all of our biceps and triceps and hamstrings and calf muscles, everything that we can kind of like touch on our arms and on our legs, those are all skeletal muscle. The second type, that is called smooth muscle. So those, they line the inside of the organs, so they contract to allow fluids to move. So the inside of all of our digestive tract has smooth muscles. So the only way that our fluids can go from our mouth to our stomach is if our smooth muscles would contract. And then the last type is cardiac muscle. So this is the muscles that are found in the heart. And once we start studying the circulatory system, we'll discover why cardiac muscle is a special type of muscle. So common examples of where you find muscles, well, any part of the body that moves has to have a muscle. So hearts, lungs, small intestines, all of your limbs, they have muscles attached to them. So that is pretty much all of our level 4. Now, when you have different types of tissues coming together, they form organs. So that's our next level. So again, level 5 is organs. Now, organs, their definition is a structure composed of 2 or more different tissue types that perform one or more specific functions. So what this means is an organ has different tissues to do a job. So tissues to do a job. So a prime example of this is the heart. So what we're going to see is the 4 main categories of tissue in a heart and what they do. So what we have right here on our left is a diagram of the heart. Now, in the heart, it's made of all of the 4 categories of tissue. So our muscle tissue, well, the whole point of the muscle tissue is to contract and relax to pump blood. Now, that's important, but how fast the muscle tissue is contracting and relaxing, well, that's only told to the heart through nervous tissue. So the job of the nervous tissue is to send messages from the heart to the brain, telling the muscle tissue to contract faster or slower. So the only way the heart's going to know if it's going to go fast or slow is if the brain is going to tell the heart to go fast or slow. And it's only going to do that through, you guessed it, the nervous tissue, because they're like our telecommunication system. Now, the epithelial tissue you have on the heart, because it's going to be protecting the muscle tissue. Because our epithelial tissue, there are grand protectors. They cover everything and they protect our organs. They're kind of like weatherproofing material. So You know, when it gets wet, you wear waterproof clothing to stay dry. So our epithelial tissue, they're the protectors. They cover everything so you don't have any damage. And then the last is the connective tissue. So blood is an example of connective tissue because blood transports nutrients throughout the body. So the connective tissue, well, the blood is pumped through the heart with the purpose of going around the body. So we see we have these 4 different tissues. And these tissues are doing different jobs. But the ultimate goal for all of these tissues is to do what? Well, to distribute substances throughout the body. So that's what an organ is. An organ has all of these different tissues doing different things, but they're doing all of these different parts for a common goal. Now, this is just one example. Throughout the rest of the term, we're going to be learning a lot of different organs, and we're going to see through learning about different organs what they do. So now what we're going to do is we are going to go to our next level of organization, which is called a system. Now, systems is basically a group of organs and tissues working together to do a common function. So, system is like an organ, but on a grander scale. So, if we remember, an organ had different tissues working together. Well, in a system, you have different organs and tissues working together for a common function. So an example is the cardiovascular system. So our next slide, we're going to see an example of the entire cardiovascular system and all the different organs and tissues in there. So what we have right here on the left is a diagram of the cardiovascular system. Now we're going to be spending a lot of time looking at this in detail, but what I want to show you is that you have different components. So the first component that we can see right in the middle, highlighted in yellow, is the heart. Then connected to the heart, you have a whole bunch of vessels. So we have arteries, which are our large vessels usually carrying oxygenated blood, so red blood. We have our veins, which are our large vessels that are carrying deoxygenated blood, so blood that doesn't have any oxygen, which is in blue. And then we have smaller and smaller blood vessels and capillaries. So capillaries are the really, really tiny blood vessels that I just highlighted. So this is basically our entire cardiovascular system, where we have the heart, the blood vessels, and the blood inside the blood vessels with the purpose of circulating nutrients. So when we're talking about nutrients, we're talking about oxygen, we're talking about sugar, and those are our 2 key nutrients that are circulating, and they're removing waste because cells are living things, so they need certain products, and when I mean certain products, I mean they need oxygen and they need sugar, and the blood takes what the cell doesn't need so it can be removed. So this is basically an example of a system where you have different organs and different tissues working together for a common goal. Now here we have a list of the main systems in the human body. So this entire list is a preview of what we're going to be doing the rest of the year. So key systems that we have our cardiovascular system, so the one that we just saw before, and its function is to transport nutrients to the cell, eliminate waste. Then we have our next system, which is our digestive system, and its whole function is to break down and absorb nutrients. Our third is our endocrine system, and this is the system where we have hormones. Our fourth is our excretory system. So it eliminates waste from the body. Our fifth is our lymphatic system. And the lymphatic system works with our immune system to protect the body against foreign microorganisms. So pretty much when you are getting sick, your lymphatic system is working on overdrive to prevent you from getting sicker. Our next is our musculoskeletal system. So that's basically muscles and skeletons combined together. So they give the body support and allows us to move. We have then our nervous system, which controls body movement. So again, this is like the telecommunication system of the body. We get messages, the brain processes these messages, and then actions are done. Then we have the reproductive system. So the organism can reproduce. And then last but not least, we have the respiratory system. And the whole point for this system is to take in oxygen and take out carbon dioxide. So why don't you pause the video clip right now so you can copy the systems and their functions. And then when you're done, we're going to move on to our last level of organization. So our last level of organization is the organism. So what's an organism? So it's a living entity produced as a result of multiple different organ systems working together. So in layman's terms, it means us. So when you have all of your atoms and molecules and cells and tissues and organ systems all working together, you get an organism. Alright, so I hope this helps. If you have any questions, come see me. Next class, we are doing the lab, which is going to be really, really awesome. Alright, thank you. Bye.